Okay, let's unpack this. If you've been following the news, you might have caught headlines from just a few days ago, July 2nd, 2025, asking whether Jamaica might, consider joining a group that's been making some serious waves. BRICS. So this deep dive is all about exploring the rapid rise of this organization, BRICS, and its implications for the global stage. Our mission today, really, is to distill the most important insights and maybe some surprising facts from the sources you've provided, helping you quickly get, well, truly well-informed about this evolving global player. So let's start right at the beginning. What exactly is BRICS? The idea itself, it actually began back in 2001. There was a British economist, Jim O'Neill, he was at Goldman Sachs then, and he coined the term BRIC, just B-R-I-C. He used it to describe a group of emerging markets, Brazil, Russia, India, China, that he believed were, poised to dominate the global economy by 2050. Fast forward to 2009, and you have the first summit. Brazil, Russia, India, and China get together, forming what was initially like an informal diplomatic club for annual talks and policy coordination.
Yeah, and what's truly remarkable, I think, is how quickly this initial economic forecast has evolved. It's become a significant intergovernmental organization. It's attracting interest from, over 30 countries globally now. Many have formally applied for membership. The S that was for South Africa got added in September 2010. But the real shift, the big one, happened January 1, 2024. That's when Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates officially joined. So boom, membership jumps from 5 to 9 countries. And just to show how dynamic this is, Saudi Arabia actually delayed its planned membership. They're still considering it as of April 2024, last I checked. Then, January 6, 2025, Indonesia officially became the 11th member. That was significant, the first Southeast Asian state to join. This rapid growth, it's why you often hear the informal term BRICS Plus being used now. And beyond full membership, there's this other layer. On October 24, 2024, an additional 13 countries were invited to participate as partner countries. Think Algeria, Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Malaysia, Nigeria, Thailand, Turkey, Uganda, Uzbekistan, Vietnam. Quite a list. This lets them engage with BRICS initiatives without, the full commitment of membership. It's also worth noting maybe that some countries have declined or were blocked. Like Argentina, they declined an invitation in December 2023. And Venezuela, well, their application was apparently blocked by Brazil in 2024, so it's not always a smooth path in.
Wow, that's a lot of expansion in a relatively short time. So all this growth, does it translate into serious economic muscle? I mean, how significant are they really on the global stage now?
Oh, absolutely it does. The original five, right, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they already had a combined nominal GDP of US $28 trillion. That's about 27% of the gross world product. And their total GDP based on purchasing power parity, PQP, was around US $65 trillion. So 35% of global GDP PPP back in 2024.
Okay, so just the original five were already over a third of the global economy in PPP terms.
Exactly. But then you factor in the expanded BRICS Plus group, the newer members, their collective power becomes even more compelling. They now generate 36% of global GDP measured by PPP.
36%. So the real takeaway here isn't just that BRICS is growing. It's that in terms of everyday economic power, that purchasing power parity measure, they've actually surpassed traditional giants like the G7 and the EU.
Precisely. That's not just a statistic. It's a fundamental shift in global economic gravity, as you put it.
That's pretty staggering.
It is. And while, yes, China is a major contributor, accounts for about 52% of that BRICS plus GDP in PPP terms, their global share in key sectors is impressive across the board. We're talking almost 30% of global oil output and 45% of global agricultural products. Think about that. 42% of the world's wheat, 52% of rice, 46% of soybeans. Huge agricultural players. The Economist Intelligence Unit even projects that the collective size of BRICS plus economies will overtake the G7 after 2045.
After 2045. Wow. Okay, so this brings us to a crucial point then. Beyond these really impressive figures, what's actually driving their ambition? What's the goal?
Well, I think the ambition stems from a pretty foundational goal for BRICS, building an alternative to what they perceive as, the Western-dominated institutions of global governance.
Right. They're looking for a more balanced playing field, it sounds like.
Exactly. And they're not just talking about it. They're building concrete mechanisms to support that goal. First, there's the New Development Bank, the NDB, headquartered in Shanghai. It was established back in 2015. It's a multilateral development bank, mainly focused on infrastructure projects. By 2024, it had approved over $32 billion for 96 projects.
$32 billion, that's serious funding.
It is, and the aim is clearly to offer more flexibility, maybe more equality, compared to traditional institutions like the World Bank. And interestingly, countries outside the core BRICS group, like Bangladesh, Egypt, the UAE, even Uruguay, they joined the NDB itself in 2021, so its reach is expanding. Then you have the BRICS Contingent Reserve Arrangement, the CRA. Also set up in 2015, you can sort of think of it like an emergency credit line between the BRICS nations, a safety net, right? For when their economies face sudden shocks or currency issues, it effectively operates as an alternative in some ways to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF.
Okay, so a bank and a sort of IMF alternative. What else?
Well, a big one they've been discussing since 2015 is the BRICS payment system, often called BRICS Pay. The idea is to create an alternative to the SWIFT system, promoting settlements in their own national currencies. And it's interesting because members like China, they already have CIPS, India has SFMS, Russia has SPFS, Brazil has PIX. These are basically their own national alternatives, showing they have the domestic capacity for large-scale digital payments and cross-border stuff already, like mini SWIFTs at home.
So the infrastructure, or at least the national level pieces, might already be there to some extent.
Potentially, yeah. And building on that, there's also the ongoing commitment from the 2023 BRICS summit. They agreed to study the feasibility of a new common currency, or maybe something called a BRICS bridge for central bank digital currency, CBDC cross-border transactions. The goal, again, is fairer, easier international trade, reduced transaction costs, and doing it independent of any single nation's currency, meaning the US dollar, primarily. However, it's important to add a bit of nuance here. India's central bank governor stated in December 2024 that for India, this whole de-dollarization thing is more about de-risking rather than actually replacing the US dollar. He also pointed out fairly that the geographical closeness of Eurozone nations makes a common currency easier there than for the, widely scattered BRICS members.
Right, that makes sense. It's a huge geographical spread. So, okay, it's clear they're not just talking about an alternative system. They're actively building one, piece by piece. Financial infrastructure, payment systems. And this ambition isn't just limited to finance, is it? You mentioned other areas.
That's right. They're also exploring collaboration in areas like space, which is fascinating. For instance, in 2021, they agreed to build a satellite constellation together and share remote sensing data. And Russia even proposed in 2023 that other BRICS members could build a joint research station on its space station. So yeah, the cooperation extends beyond just economics.
That is fascinating. A BRICS satellite network. Okay, so that's a lot of collective action, a lot of ambition. But, with such a diverse group, democracies, autocracies, economic giants, developing nations, can BRICS truly function as a unified force? Because despite its impressive growth, it must face some pretty significant internal complexities, right?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely does. And it's interesting, Jim O'Neill, the guy who coined the term BRIC, he's actually expressed an updated view in 2021 and again in 2024, basically calling BRICS a failed project.
Yeah.
His argument is that it primarily generates symbolic gestures and lofty rhetoric and hasn't really united as a meaningful global force.
A failed project. That's quite a statement from the originator.
It is, and one of the main reasons cited for skepticism like O'Neill's is the inherent heterogeneity of the group, just as you said. You've got dictatorships alongside democracies, you have economic superpowers like China next to smaller developing nations. This diversity can naturally lead to, intra-organizational rivalries.
Like the China-India situation.
Exactly, that's a prime example. The ongoing Sino-Indian rivalry, marked by those serious border disputes in the Himalayas. Remember the 2017 Doklam standoff? And the deadly 2020 Galwan Valley clash. These are major tensions between two key members. China even released a disputed map right after the 2023 BRICS summit, which, didn't exactly help relations. And India, for its part, seems to use its BRICS membership partly as a channel to counterbalance China, while also participating in the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia for security purposes. It's a balancing act.
A tricky balancing act, for sure.
Definitely. And just the increasing number of members makes things complicated. It complicates China's ability to kind of steer the group without seeming overly assertive, which can cause friction. And of course, the countries within BRICS have very different relationships with the West. Some cooperate closely, others are more confrontational. They have different levels of cooperation and hedging strategies, especially now, given the pretty high US-China tensions.
It really is fascinating how diverse the individual motivations are for these members. It absolutely shows this group is far from being like A single bloc with one mind. What, for instance, has driven Brazil's engagement over the years? And how does that compare to, say, Indonesia's reasons for just joining recently?
Yeah, that's a great point to dig into. Brazil, for instance, historically sought prestige on the global stage. BRICS was also a way to manage its critical economic relationship with China, which is now its most important trading partner by far. And Brazil also seemed to value BRICS as a kind of mutual diplomatic support group. Okay, sources mention it provided backing during periods of global isolation from the West, like shielding Russia's President Putin in 2014 after the Crimea annexation, or even Brazil's own President Bolsonaro in 2021 when he faced international criticism. Looking ahead, Brazil's 2025 presidency will likely focus on less controversial stuff, food security, the green transition, probably aiming to keep the group from becoming, overtly anti-Western.
Okay, so Brazil's motivations are multifaceted. What about India? You mentioned counterbalancing China, but what else?
India really prioritizes what's called multi-alignment, basically keeping options open to safeguard its own interests. They see BRICS as a kind of hedge against uncertainties in the U.S. strategic trajectory, while at the same time maintaining very robust ties with Russia, especially for armaments and energy. So again, balancing different relationships.
And South Africa. What's their angle?
South Africa uses BRICS to sort of punch above its weight in global debates, to shape discussions, challenge Western narratives sometimes, and also to position itself as a gateway to Africa for trade and investment, especially within the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Okay, so the original members had their reasons. What about the newer ones? What's driving countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, or Indonesia to jump on board now?
For new members like Egypt and Ethiopia, a big driver seems to be securing financial and development aid, plus major investments, particularly in infrastructure. They view BRICS as a platform that promotes multipolarity, a world not dominated by one superpower, and offers an alternative economic and political bloc. Indonesia, on the other hand, frames its membership as strategic diversification. It allows them to trade more easily with fast-developing markets they don't usually do much business with, and it expands their options for technology transfer and infrastructure development, especially through that new development bank.
And the Gulf states, UAE and Saudi Arabia, is it about moving away from the U.S.?
The public stance is more about diversifying partnerships beyond just traditional Western allies, responding to shifting global economic dynamics. They talk about promoting a rules-based international order based on genuine multilateralism and mutual respect. They don't explicitly frame it as a counterweight to the U.S., though obviously it diversifies their foreign policy
You went on
options.
Nigeria. They're a partner country, right?
Right. Nigeria believes it naturally belongs in this group. They see it as a really crucial space to strengthen economic ties, attract investment, and facilitate technology transfer, especially with China, which is its biggest trade partner, and the UAE, which is the top source of foreign direct investment, FDI, in Africa. So clear economic motivations there.
So we have all these diverse motivations, economic goals, geopolitical strategies. But some sources also raise tough questions, don't they? About whether BRICS can truly offer a more fair international order when facing internal challenges related to human rights. What are some of the specific concerns highlighted there?
Yeah, that's an important and sensitive consideration. While BRICS nations often emphasize a right to development as a key human right, some sources do report significant human rights concerns domestically for many members. For instance, there are widespread reports of abuses against the Uyghur population in China's Xinjiang region, alongside broader concerns about repression of dissent. Russia has seen a dramatic crackdown on dissent in recent years, using things like foreign agents, laws against human rights groups, and independent media. In India, there are reports of restrictions on civil society and concerns about the situation for religious minorities who have reportedly faced hate crimes and violence. Even South Africa, which is a more open democracy, struggles with the highest income inequality in the world. That Gini coefficient of about 0.67 signals an exceptionally high level of income disparity. And generally, the civic space for independent dialogue and criticism within some BRICS countries is reported as being quite limited.
That definitely adds another layer of complexity to the narrative of BRICS offering a fundamentally different or fairer model. So, okay, given all this, the expansion, the ambition, the internal tensions, the human rights questions, how does the United States view this rapidly expanding bloc? Is Washington seeing BRICS as a real challenger to the current world order?
Well, the U.S. reaction seems somewhat mixed or perhaps understated, according to some analysts. Some suggest the U.S. has generally avoided publicly acknowledging the growing significance of BRICS, despite its increasing influence. However, former President Donald Trump has certainly been vocal. He expressed particular disdain, even stating BRICS is dead back in February 2025. He also threatened things like 100% tariffs on countries that pursue a BRICS currency or favor non-US dollar currencies. He seemed to believe his threats had effectively silenced the bloc.
BRICS is dead. Quite definitive. But what about other perspectives within the U.S. foreign policy community?
Right. Joseph Nye, a well-known political scientist, offered a more nuanced take in January 2025. He argued that while BRICS is certainly useful for its individual members, like Russia escaping diplomatic isolation, China projecting leadership, India counterbalancing China, he doesn't really view it as a new fulcrum of world politics. Nye actually suggested that the expansion, adding more diverse members, could lead to more intra-organizational rivalries, potentially limiting the group's overall effectiveness as a unified actor.
So expansion could be a double-edged sword, potentially
Yeah.
diluting its focus or coherence.
That's the argument, yeah. But ultimately, the broader context here is that BRICS, as a collective, seeks to build an alternative to what its members perceive as the dominance of the Western viewpoint in major multilateral groups, the World Bank, the G7, the UN Security Council. They advocate for what they call inclusive multilateralism and push for reforms, especially of the UN Security Council, to ensure fairer representation for a global South. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the rise of BRICS really reflects a deep desire from many countries in the global South for a rebalancing of global power. It's fundamentally challenging that long-standing international order led by the U.S. since World War II.
Okay, so with all this global reshaping happening, this push for multipolarity, you might be wondering, where does a nation like Jamaica fit into all this?
Right. Back to Jamaica. Currently, Jamaica is not a member or even a partner country of BRICS. However, there was a significant moment. A historic invitation, as some call it. Prime Minister Andrew Holness was specially invited to attend the 10th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. That was back in July 2018. He was the first head of government from Jamaica, and indeed the entire Caribbean, to participate in a BRICS Summit. So there's some history there.
Okay, so they've engaged at a high level before, and now, as we mentioned, the question is popping up again.
Exactly. As of July 2nd, 2025, just days ago, news outlets and commentators are still asking, will Jamaica join BRICS? The discussion is active. And notably, former Jamaican Prime Minister P.J. Patterson made a strong statement recently in July 2025. He urged Jamaica to embrace blocs, even despite those warnings from former President Trump. Patterson called it a seminal moment in global relations for Jamaica, a chance to exercise its sovereignty and agency, alongside what he called Global Africa, referring to that collective strategic identity of African nations and the diaspora. He envisions a new economic model that BRICS could help unlock for Jamaica's prosperity. And he highlighted the sheer scale of BRICS, 30% of the world's land, 45% of its population, and that huge combined GDP, US $88 trillion.
Strong words from a former PM. But what's the economic reality for Jamaica? Why might this be appealing or complicated?
Well, Jamaica's economic context is key. The island relies very heavily on tourism. Something like 70% of its GDP comes from tourism. It's also a major bauxite producer. It's actively seeking substantial foreign investment, including from both China and the U.S., especially for tourism development. But despite this potential, official statistics still indicate high poverty rates persist. So the allure of new economic partnerships and investment sources via BRICS is understandable.
And what about the wider Caribbean view? Is Jamaica's situation unique, or are other islands facing similar questions?
From a broader Caribbean perspective, some sources raise critical questions. They ask if Caribbean nations are even ready for BRICS. The argument made is that many of these islands, despite their resource wealth in some cases, still have very close political and economic ties to the nations that formerly enslaved them. This, the argument goes, perhaps prevents them from fully breaking ties with former colonial rulers, and might align poorly with BRICS' stated aim of creating new rules of the game without old bullying tactics. They point to examples like Trinidad and Tobago, vast natural gas and oil reserves, but still high poverty, or Guyana, with its massive new oil field, but also significant poverty. It highlights that historical context of wealth extraction.
So there's a tension between historical ties and the potential future offered by groups like BRICS. What could Jamaica specifically bring to BRICS, according to these sources?
Well, sources identify a couple of areas where Jamaica could offer potential benefits to the bloc. One is its blue economy initiatives. Things like sustainable fisheries, marine conservation, utilizing ocean resources sustainably for economic growth. Another is its advancements in renewable energy, particularly solar and wind power. These are areas of growing global importance where Jamaica has made some strides. So, what stands out to you about Jamaica's really complex position here, balancing those deep historical ties with the potential promise of these new global partnerships?
It's incredibly complex. Okay, so to try and summarize our deep dive today, BRICS clearly represents a dynamic, growing force in a world that seems undeniably moving towards multipolarity. It's offering a distinct alternative path, or at least the framework for one, compared to the long-standing Western-led institutions.
Yeah, and stepping back, if we consider the broader implications, the evolution of BRICS, with its increasing economic heft, its institutional development like the NDB and the CRA discussions, it really signifies a profound reevaluation of global governance that's underway. It's fundamentally about more countries asserting their own interests and seeking systems that they believe better reflect a truly global, more inclusive world.
So here's something to think about as we wrap up. Consider this. As BRICS continues to expand, maybe add more partners and refine these alternative mechanisms, the payment systems, the currency ideas, how might this shift actually impact our everyday lives? Think about the stability of global supply chains, the future of international trade, maybe even the value of currencies. How could it affect things, even if your own country isn't a direct member? Something to mull over. Until next time, keep diving deep.